The most interesting guests in the music industry, entertainment, art, and politics step into the studio for Turning Point with Frank MacKay. And now, Turning Point with Frank MacKay.
Welcome, everyone, to Turning Point. Our very special guest today is Felix Cavaliere from the Rascals and other projects. I mentioned the Rascals because they are getting together for a reunion real soon. Welcome, Felix. How are you?
I'm well. Good to speak to you.
So how long has it been since the band has played together?
Well, let's see. We did a special benefit in 2010. And prior to that, we did the Hall of Fame, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, 1997, I believe. Prior to that, you're going back quite a while.
So, yeah,
quite a while.
This is a rare event. So you guys are getting together. And let's give a quick plug to that. I know you sold out, but let's give a quick plug. It's happening in December.
Yeah, Steve Van Zandt from the Bruce's E Street Band has taken it upon himself to put together a show. And it's not exactly just a show that is a band. It's a stage show. It's a theater production that's going to be done hopefully throughout the country in the near future. Right now, we're starting it off in Portchester, New York, Capitol Theater. It's a multimedia type of show, and it's going to be pretty interesting. And hopefully, it's called Once Upon a Dream. We'll be able to take it around the country. Well,
yeah, it sounds good. I'm sure you've gotten a lot of offers over the years to reunite. You're doing it in the Capitol Theater. You didn't grow up far from there. You grew up in Pelham, New York. Am I right?
Exactly. This theater has just been completely redone and revamped to be a multimedia type of place. Whereas the lights can work and the screens can work and there's actually actors. It's going to be quite an idea that he's put together, and we'll see what happens. It's kind of a trial run, but if it works, it's going to be great. Because, other than doing a concert series, that really didn't appeal to me that much to begin with. Do something different, and hopefully it'll catch on, and, then you're accomplishing something.
Let's talk about growing up a little bit. You grew up in Pelham, New York, and for those people that don't know where that is, that's in the Bronx, New York.
Well, no, it's actually Westchester County. It's right adjacent to the towns of Mount Vernon and New Rochelle, and, of course, the City Island in the Bronx, and it's a Westchester County suburb.
And you're right on the border of the Bronx? You're not far from
Right on the border of all those places, absolutely, which is really what makes it so cool because, you're like 15, 20 minutes from New York City, and yet you're still in those days it was a suburban neighborhood. It's kind of like built up quite a bit, but it was a beautiful place to live.
You grew up, you were the son of a dentist and
Correct.
a pharmacist, so you had some educated parents. And from what I read and what I've heard in different interviews, they would have liked for you to have been a classical musician. Am I right?
Correct. That's how I was trained. I was trained that way in the beginning, and I'm very thankful for that because I got an education in the theories of music and learning to get your finger dexterity and get your musical knowledge and then basically what happened is my mom passed away and I didn't have that pressure on to go that way, and I was able to try out and experiment with what would be pop music, modern music, rock and roll from that point on. But I had the basis, is what I'm saying.
Where would Felix Cavaliere, rock and roll legend, Felix Cavaliere, I'm sure you've heard all the accolades over the years. You really had some career, and a lot of people that are in the music business and play and sing and write would love to have half the success that you've had. Growing up, who were you watching? Who were you listening to?
Well, I had the good fortune of growing up, as I say, near New York City, where Alan Freed brought his rock and roll radio station, which I believe at that time was WINS. So I heard all of the best of the early rock and roll, R&B groups, which included the Flamingos and the Marvelettes and Fats Domino, Jerry Lee Lewis, of course Elvis Presley, Marvin Gaye, Smokey Robinson, everyone that was available in those days was right here in the metropolitan area. So that I feel very fortunate to be able to have heard the very roots and seeds of what we know today as rock and roll pop music.
Yeah, and well, you mentioned Ray Charles. That must have been a big influence. Your instrument was piano, and from everything I heard about you, you're a big Ray Charles fan.
Well, he was really the first one who I really paid attention to that was a piano player or a pianist, because his style obviously was completely different from anything that I had ever heard. So that kind of really inspired me to try to learn to do what he was doing. And, as I say, the many, many, many keyboard players from that point on, Fats Domino, Jerry Lee Lewis, as I said, there was quite a history of that. And then I learned about organ playing from like Jimmy Smith and people like that. And then I heard about singing from the people like Marvin Gaye. So all of that appealed to me, producing from Phil Spector, and from Berry Gordy. So all of these people influenced me to try to do what they do. And I never really locked myself up into one door, because I really felt that my training allowed me to do all of that.
We're with Felix Cavaliere, certainly a history in the music business and a history in rock and roll. And Felix, you started out, your first band was the Stereos, if I'm correct.
Well, actually, the Stereos were a singing group in high school. We had a multiracial singing group way before that was kind of the proper thing to do, and toured around a lot of the different high schools in those days. And then I was part of a band much later. So I didn't really actually start playing in a band. Really, I played with one in high school, but it was really like it was a different kind of an entity rather than being a band. It was more of a band that did all kind of functions like weddings and proms, and we played all those kind of bar mitzvah events and stuff like that. And then college, when I went to college at Syracuse, I started a band which was called the Escorts.
What was the scene upstate like, the Syracuse area, that whole section of Western New York? What was the scene in those days?
Well, basically, at that time, Syracuse was a major, major football power. Now
still,
it's the best.
Well, still, it's they had Don McPherson a couple years ago, and
right,
big time player.
And we had just come off a national championship, I think, the year or two before I got there. So it was like craziness. So I had an opportunity to play in the parties, for the fraternity houses, and I'm very proud to say, we kind of broke a little bit of a racial barrier up there by playing for a lot of the athletes, and making sure that we were welcome there and they were welcome where we were playing. So it was during those those tumultuous years in the '60s, and it was great because the music crossed all the lines and the barriers. So it was a great place to go to school. It was a great school, and as I say, it was exciting because of the athletic events. It was really happening place at that time.
Well, the protest to actually, what year was that? I should get my dates.
These are in the early '60s.
Yeah, so the protests weren't high yet, I imagine, right? You weren't.
Well, the interesting thing is, I went to a high school where, I don't know if you remember those three fellas that went down to Mississippi and were killed. One of those boys went to school in where I went to school in Westchester. His name was Mickey Schwerner. So I was part of that movement way, way back because of the fact that he was there, and for other reasons as well. As growing up as an Italian in Westchester was an interesting experience because not only we were a minority, we didn't exist. Mm. So, you had to kind of fight for your place in society, if you want to call it that. I mean, I know that my family, who, as you say, were basically educated people, they were not accepted as that in the community, and that kind of bothered me as a boy, and it kind of stuck with me till this day that, we have to treat each other the same, or basically there's going to be some trouble.
We're with Felix Cavaliere of the Rascals. You're a founding member of the Rascals?
Yes.
Who were the other founders? Who were the other beginning?
Well, basically, I put put the group together from guys that I thought were the best guys that I could find at that time in my life and in my environment, which fortunately was New York City at that time. We had Dino Donnelly on drums. Mm-hmm. We had Gene Cornish on a guitar. And we had Eddie Brigatti singing.
And those are guys that you met where?
Various places in New York City. You know, I met Eddie, actually. I met his brother through Joey D and the Starlighters. Dino I met as a result of somebody introducing to me to him at the Metropole in New York. Cornish also came through the Joey D organization. So, you know, that's where I was. I was working with Joey D in Europe for a while before I came back to the United States, and I was able to start the band approximately 1964 or 65, rather. And 65, you know, we got together, and we were very fortunate in that we had a record deal within 6 months, and we were very fortunate again because we had good loving almost 2 or 3 months after that. So it was a quick rise, and you know, we had a wonderful, wonderful career, I felt, until, you know, things started to fall apart internally, which is always a shame.
How long did it last? How long did it last before the troubles?
Well, the actual band lasted five full years, and then that was it. And you know, that was the Atlantic years. And then I took the band over to Columbia Records. Unfortunately, it was not the same band, and tried to make a little bit of a different musical kind of adventure. But, you know, it's very difficult once fans hear a certain sound and get used to a certain thing. They really don't like to, you know, embrace something new. And there's a few exceptions, but not many. I think Paul McCartney's Wings were one of the exceptions. But for the most part, you know, we had the Rascals intact for 5 years, and then we had basically a Rascal hybrid for, I believe it was 2 years into the Columbia year. So that would have been 1972, believe it or not, a long time ago.
Yeah. We're with Felix Cavaliere of the Rascals.
Turning Point with Frank MacKay returns right after this. Welcome back to Turning Point with Frank MacKay.
We're with Felix Cavaliere of the Rascals and the New Rascals, right? That was you changed the name when you went to Columbia? Is that what happened?
No, I'm not a New Rascal. I'm an old Rascal. New Rascals is a whole different entity. That's not us. I never used that name. I just felt, you know, that this was the Rascals, and, you know, because the people who were there, you know.
Yeah, well, my apologies on that. But did you have lawsuits? Right. Did you have lawsuits on the New Rascals? Were there?
Well, we had lawsuits on everything, you know, and that's the dark part of our career, is that, you know, something I'm kind of like really sorry to even mention, because it was totally unnecessary nonsense. And, you know, lawyers became very wealthy and spent a lot of money on nothing. And, you know, I basically was the brunt of all of those suits. And, you know, it's taken me a while to kind of like say, okay, let it go under the bridge. But, you know, the bottom line is there's no excuse for people inside of a family to sue one another unless, you know, there's embezzlement or something like really serious happening. And this was all nonsense.
Yeah, well,
but, you know, unfortunately, the legal system in this country embraces nonsense. So very expensive nonsense took place.
How about the treatment from the labels? You know, when I talk to guys like Tommy James, and, you know, he had a nightmare of a career getting paid.
Did.
Yeah. How about you? Did you have the similar circumstances?
No, I really admire Tommy, because you're right. You used the right word, nightmare. And he's a survivor. He's come out on his feet. And, you know, one of the statements that he made that I would like to kind of like repeat, basically, even though, you know, we were not treated anywhere near, you know, as badly as he was, we still have a career many, many, many years afterwards. So you have to say kind of thank you to those people that even though they did not treat us the way, you know, they should have treated us in terms of monetary and fairness, et cetera, we're still alive, we're still working, we're still doing it. And that speaks for itself. You know, they did a good job. Every place but the accounts payable.
Yeah. Yeah, that's for sure. Something that you said earlier struck me. You seem to meet the founding members of the Rascals in professional situations. In other words, they weren't your high school buddies or the guys you grew up with in Pelham or Westchester.
Correct.
You met them in professional situations. You didn't meet them in college. What's the difference in starting a band? And again, you said it only took you about 6 months to get a deal. How much more difficult is it starting from scratch with your buddies, as opposed to, really cherry picking, I guess, the best of what you saw as the best to, the professional ranks?
Well, I really think it's better to do it cherry picking personally, because friendships can get in the way of kind of like really really intelligent kind of decisions. Like if you have a band because you like the guy or because he's a friend of yours, doesn't mean he's the best person for that job. And so in our case, I think it was the right way to go. I mean, the guys that were around in those days, that were called friends, they couldn't do what these guys did. They just didn't have the talent, or didn't have the ambition, or they had different ideals of going out into the world and being, whatever they wanted to be. So I don't know. I think the more professional you can be when you start an organization, I think you're better off in the long run. I wish I had even been a little bit more professional, quite frankly. We were structured properly business-wise, from top to bottom, and we still kind of failed as individual being, like in part of a partnership or a company, which is something that will always bother me. And I think that there should have been even a little bit more structure in the beginning to avoid that. But no one knew. Everything was so new in those years. Plus, we were extremely young. We were very, very young. And, we kind of relied on other people for our business acumen and business ideas. And, after looking back, I said, well, okay, I guess what we should have done was this. And but I really like working with professional people in every aspect of my life.
How much traveling did you do as a kid?
Well, as a kid, I was able to travel a lot because of my parents, going on vacation, et cetera, and things like that. And we took ships, and we kind of like did a lot of different things that a lot of people may not have been able to do. So I really always, being a Sagittarian, I enjoy traveling. I love traveling. I've been over to almost. Well, 3/4 of the world anyway, and the group took me around the world, and, my music is still taking me around the world. I've traveled to China. I've traveled to Japan. So I think I got it in my blood very early that traveling can be fun,
The reason I ask is, a lot of young guys, that's where they start falling apart, and they don't have the travel experience. How did you guys travel together when you first hit it?
You mean what mode? We started off, basically, driving, basically carrying a U-Haul in the back of my car, and things happened very quickly. After Good Lovin', we were a national group at that time, so the car went. Basically now you're going to try to go on planes. We never really did much buses. I never really was a big fan of buses. The only bus tour that we did was with Dick Clark. We did an early Dick Clark tour, Caravan of Stars or something like that, which was fantastic because, there's nothing like going into all the little cities and opening up doors. I mean, we did the South on that trip, and we gathered up an audience that has been with us ever since.
When I said how did you guys travel together, I was talking more of behavior or relationships. Did you guys?
Oh well, we had a good relationship in the early days. Everybody was just young and vibrant, and really interested in accomplishing what we were trying to do, which was just to basically have a career and have fun and make good music, and it was really exciting. Those days were phenomenal because it was all of the British invasion, and we had the good fortune of being one of the only 2 or 3 groups that were American, so there was a pride that followed us wherever we went, that here we are, standing ground with the best that's coming out of Europe. And, to this day, I still feel that kind of pride when I walk down the street here. Somebody turns around and says, you guys, like, for example, I had a friend of this guy I met down in the village one day, says, man, you guys made it cool for Italians to have long hair. Before you guys came along, we used to get beat up for having long hair.
Yeah.
So there's something, being from the East Coast, you understand what I'm talking about. It's that song, if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere.
Yeah.
There's a loyalty here that tell you the truth, I don't know if it exists in the rest of the country. But if you're somebody in New York City, man, you're somebody for the rest of your life.
People listening to this, and again, we're speaking with Felix Cavaliere of the Rascals. People listening to this that are young guys, and I got a young engineer here, and he's an Italian. They're thinking prejudice against Italians, but you forget. I mean, back in the 50s and 60s, I mean, you folks, from your side of the boot, or this way from the boot, had a lot of prejudice against him. I mean, the Italians weren't highly regarded, unfortunately. And nowadays, I mean, it sounds laughable, but back when you were growing up, I'm sure there was a lot of.
It's not even laughable today, because what you have to, with all due respect to my wonderful friends, we're not all sopranos.
That's right.
You know exactly what I mean. We're not all, we're not all hooligans, from the old country, that wear hats and, beat people with sticks either, There's stereotypes here, and they're still here. I mean, there's no doubt about it. That's why I was so happy, very, very happy. And I don't want to get into politics with you, but when the Jersey Boys became one of the biggest selling shows of all time, that made me pretty proud.
Yeah, I mean, I could see
Absolutely.
that. Well, you mentioned that.
We hear about a lot of the groups that have come from the other side and have no vowels in their name, and they're legends, et cetera, et cetera. You know what? Biggest show of all time on Broadway as far as rock and roll is concerned, as far as I know. I carry that banner with me wherever I go.
Yeah, you also had Dion DiMucci from a borough away who did pretty well. And
so anyway, I mean, it's really cool. And, as I said, something that stuck with me as a little boy, and it's still there, and I can't help it. I live down south now, and it's still there. And, the point is that, at this time in 2012, I think it's time for people to realize that there's a unity amongst all mankind, whether they like it or not. That's how I feel about it.
Yeah, I would hope so. I would hope people are moving closer to that. You mentioned that we're not all hooligans, and you mentioned the Sopranos. There was a mob presence in the business back then, and there's no secret. And we mentioned Tommy James. Did you guys rub up against it?
Well, we did, of course. Everybody did, but we had a buffer, and the buffer was a very interesting one, and that was our manager, Sid Bernstein, who, although he was Jewish, he went to school with somebody who was very, very, very important, and so we never were bothered at all.
Yeah, that's it.
At all.
I had the honor of knowing Sid, and he's still going strong. From what he's in his 90s. Sid, do you keep in touch with him?
He's still going. I don't know about strong.
Yeah.
But, he's in his 90s, is right.
I take that back. He's still going, right? He's a great guy. Great guy, and he was.
He's an interesting man. I mean, he's a man that really took the music business to heart, and not to his wallet. You know, and those guys are hard to find, because most of the guys that did it in those days, they're all about how much money they made, and they didn't leave a legacy except for their money. And so he's an interesting man. Of course, there's been a book written about him, and I think that there's going to be a little bit more too in the future.
Yeah, well, that's certainly very interesting. And we mentioned "Good Loving." You talk about a song that you could turn on the radio and hear just about 5 times a day, 10 times a day, wherever you live. I mean, are you still doing well off of that? I mean, royalty wise.
Well, yes and no. The royalties today are a different story than they were. There's a whole different music business today, Frank. This is very different. People just kind of got a little different idea about paying musicians these days. It seems to me that intellectual property has become almost a joke. In other words, like if you wrote it and published it, too bad. We want it for nothing. So it's a little different, and the business has entirely changed when it comes to what we would call royalties. So, that's okay. That's just the way it's the way it is.
We're with Felix Cavaliere of the Rascals.
Turning Point with Frank MacKay returns right after this. Welcome back to Turning Point with Frank MacKay.
We're with Felix Cavaliere of the Rascals. Where did you see a change? Like, roughly what year did you see that changing? Is it directly connected to the internet, or did it happen before
it's
that?
Directly connected to the internet, whether they like it or not. It's directly connected to the internet, and the fact that well, I mean, in the old days, if you had a 45, or if you had an LP and you wanted to copy it to a cassette, they paid a surcharge on every cassette that was made, but they didn't pay it to us.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a surcharge. You bought a cassette, there was an extra tax added to that cassette. And then, of course, when CDs came along and they found out that all I had to do was upload, into the computer and then onto the CD, well, that really changed things. And then when the internet came along and decided that they were going to change from basically what was an album sale to a single sale with, the iTunes, et cetera, well, now instead of making $14 or $15 on a product, which of course we didn't make, but you made 99 cents.
Yeah.
So, but there's also reasons on the other end. I mean, if you were going out and buying albums for $15, that there was one song you liked. You can't blame the internet only, the record companies, and they got really greedy. You buy an album and you hate it except for one song. So let me buy the one song.
You said they got really greedy. I think people would argue that they were always greedy.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, there's no question. But on the other hand, I mean, like if you look at the legacy of the Motown and the Atlantic, and the Warners, I mean, this music will be around forever. So basically you get into the economics of it, and you can start saying by those son of a guns, man, they screwed everybody. But you know what? This music will last. It'll be in the time capsules forever. So, it's really a catch-22 there, I mean, you got a good thing and you got a bad thing. So it just means that it's human.
Yeah. How are you with statistics? Do you know how many records you've sold all totaled? How many gold records? Are you good on all that?
Well, first of all, no one could answer that question. I mean, whether they're good or not, there's no answer to that. As far as gold records, I don't remember. I had a fire, and I kind of lost all of that stuff. But everything we did on Atlantic went gold in those days, and then of course platinum came along in the later years with the advent of Cream. I think was the first platinum album, if I'm not mistaken.
That's interesting.
It's all very, very, very different now, because now you have how many hits you get from the internet.
Right.
It's really different.
Yeah, things have changed. That's for sure.
It's good.
We're talking about the history of rock and roll here with Felix Cavaliere, and Felix, you really are. Your career is, you could really tie back to a history of rock and roll. I mean, I guess you really started about 10 years after the whole Elvis boom and everything. Maybe not 10 years, but, you were the next decade.
Yep.
How much did you watch early on? And, again, we talked about Ray Charles, and we talked about your different influences with the piano players and so forth. When you saw Elvis Presley on, I'm assuming you saw him on Ed Sullivan like everyone else of your generation, did you say, this is it? This is changing everything. There's a whole new world happening. Or did you just kind of take it as it, with a grain of salt?
Well, no, I mean, from a musical point of view, it's really what interested me. I said, man, how cool is that? That's really, really cool, because, I had no idea at that time that I was even going to attempt this. I mean, I just basically like music. I love music. Like most of the people out there listening to your stations, they're, they love to play music, man. I mean, like whether they want to give up their careers and other things, probably they would if they could. But I really had, you don't think in those years, I was pretty young, that, that's what I want to do. I just, love to play music, I still do. I mean, I moved to Nashville, Tennessee because of the fact that I can do music almost every day down there. Very easily, because so many people in the town are musicians and writers, and you don't really think about things, you just do things in your life. I tell that to my kids all the time, and then if you do it well, perhaps you can have a career at it, or if somebody notices you. But, once you start, like, really getting serious about your career and stuff like that, to me, you're probably at college years, because most of the people that go to college, they don't know what they want to do. If they do, they're very fortunate, I just kind of like went with the flow, and the flow took me into this, and I'm very thankful.
How about your kids? How many of them have followed you into the the business, if any?
Fortunately, none. Yeah, they kind of know what this business is all about. So there's very talented people in my family. I've got 5 kids, and I had twins, and some of them are very, very, very good and very talented. But what I try to tell them and everybody else is that creative abilities don't only go into the musical kind of like outlets. You can paint, you can sculpt, you can be an architect, you can be a lot of different things, fashion designer. They're all creators. They all come from the same kind of source. So they've taken careers like that upon themselves. One was a dancer, and they just realized that this business here is very tough on your family. It's really difficult to maintain any kind of stability in the music industry, and I've been very fortunate. But they know what it's like, so they with the exception of one, they're all married, they have kids, and they're rocking and rolling, but in their own way, in their own path.
Yeah, we're with Felix Cavaliere of the Rascals, and Felix, the name of our show is Turning Point. What was the turning point in your life, or if you prefer, what was the turning point in your career?
Well, I mean, I think I should get up there in age. There's a lot of turning points, And there's a lot of things that changed my life, from, as I say, my mom passing when I was 12 or 13. Now, all of a sudden, I'm not going to really have to worry about being a classical pianist. I can kind of relax a little bit because she was the one that wanted me to do that. Now I can go a different direction. That was a major turning point. And then, of course, going to college and, kind of realizing after taking one summer off that I worked in the Catskill Mountains that I really would like to try this musicianship stuff. And that was a turning point. And then, of course, meeting with the guys and putting the group together and getting a deal on Atlantic Records, that was a turning point. And Good Lovin' was definitely a turning point. Group breaking up was another turning point. I mean, there's so many turning points, and all I can say is that I've enjoyed almost every single one of them because, to me, life's a big adventure. And the next turning point, which is coming up shortly, is this new kind of Rascal reunion. And who knows what's coming after that. I just enjoy change. I enjoy kind of challenges. I enjoy trying to jump over the next hoop, and kind of keeps me young and keeps me feeling good,
What do you do in Nashville? Are you producing, or you're performing or recording? What's your main duties down in Nashville?
Basically, the part of the industry that really has really the most interest for me is songwriting. So that's what I do in Nashville primarily. When you create, you just want to create, and when you don't create, I get very kind of antsy, And down there, you can literally write every day of the week with different people too, because much like L.A. is all about screenwriting, Nashville's all about music writing, and it's cool because people come from all over the world down there to write. And it's amazing how many studios there are and how many musicians there are because there's work there. Work meaning doing demo work or doing album work. We have really a high quality of musicianship now down there. So it's like what I want to do for the rest of my life, I hope, is to just create new music.
Well, it's great, and you have a great place for it. What do you do from here? What goals do you have, if any? I mean, do you just want to continue doing what you're doing, or are there specific goals? Are there singers out there or artists that you would like to work with?
Well, I mean, I think basically first thing to do is to keep healthy. That's a big goal.
How are you doing on that? Yeah, healthy?
I'm doing great. I work out all the time, and I'm really a kind of a nut when it comes to organic and all that kind of stuff and what goes into the system. And I just like to, as I say, keep creating. I'm always on the lookout for some new artists that I could produce or something like that. I think this potential for an off-Broadway or Broadway show here with this thing has really got my interest. And we'll just see what happens from here. I mean, I intend to make some new albums. As a matter of fact, I'm planning another Kickstart event in January of 2013 to put together some funds for a new album that I hope people want to hear. Doing an album today is a whole different thing than it was in the old days because they really don't sell as a rule. They just go to your fans,
Yeah.
And that's fine with me as long as I keep making music.
Yeah. Why complain about that? You're making money with music and you're making music for your fans. That's a nice thing.
Right.
Do you have a Pro Tools set up at home or some kind of
Yeah,
setup?
we all have that down there. Pretty much in everybody's home there's some sort of a studio, that's based upon a computer that's, still not as good as a real studio, but okay, because you can have fun and you can make, good sounds, and then you can take it into a real studio and record it. And, it's a very vibrant place down there for musicians. That's one thing I must say.
We are with.
We don't have the restaurants that you have up here, but
yeah. How is Nashville? It's not a 24-hour town, right?
No, by any means.
What time do they? What time do they roll in the sidewalks?
Well, I mean, basically, you're off the streets in the suburbs certainly by 9, and in the so-called city, it's like a White Plains. Seriously, it's not a big city, but bottom line is it's based a lot upon the tourists that come in to hear and see the country, and it's becoming a huge convention place. If you take a look on the internet, see the convention center that they're building there, I don't think you'll believe how huge it is. So it's becoming a meeting place for people for business, and but it'll always be a musical hub because the fact that the word is out. If you want to come down and write, this is where you come, and it's great, because of that. For me, it's great.
Anything you want to add? You have a website? You have something you want to plug?
Oh, we have FelixCavaliere.com. I just enjoy speaking to you, and I'm on my way right now to a rehearsal to get ready for this event here. And I want to thank all the people out there that have supported us all these years. And, we just want to let them know we're very thankful for them being around.
Thank you, Felix, and thank you all for listening. You've been listening to Felix Cavaliere, really a lesson in the history of rock and roll and the great career that this man has had, and he's a wonderful guy. Everything I know about him and everything you hear about him, he's really a down-to-earth guy. Felix, thank you very much. Thanks for being here. And thank you all for tuning in to Turning Point. We'll see you next week.
Turning Point with Frank MacKay is brought to you by Herman, Katz, Conjemi & Klein, Duffy & Duffy, Gold Coast Bank, Heartland Business Center, Morgan Stanley and Smith Barney of PC Wealth Management, and the Hagedorn Little Village School in Seaford, New York. Turning Point with Frank MacKay was produced by GVP Digital Media in Ronkonkoma, New York. Executive producers Frank MacKay and Harry Oates. Associate producers Kristen and John MacKay. Audio and studio engineering Brittany Fergo and Francis Kazmarek. Hotel and accommodations provided by Ohika Castle Hotel and Estates in Huntington, New York. Transportation services provided by Mark of Elegance Limousine in Hauppauge, New York. Catering services provided by Cella Bagels of Selden, New York.